I'm Emily, I'm married, and we have a son named Richard who recently reached adulthood. A few years ago, Richard moved out, and now my husband and I live together in a spacious house. Initially, I felt lonely after our son left, but I've grown accustomed to it. However, I'm always delighted when I receive a call from him saying he's coming home. On the day Richard was coming home, my husband and I were excited from the morning. It was before our son told us he wanted both of us to be at home because he had someone he wanted to introduce. Before noon, Richard arrived with a lovely woman. I had anticipated this from his words, but I never thought he would actually bring her home. To our surprise, he proudly introduced her, saying, "Her name is Karen, isn't she cute? She's my proud wife." I couldn't immediately grasp my son's words. After a moment of thought, I asked, "Richard, did you just call Karen your wife, not your girlfriend?" My son nodded in agreement and teased, "Maybe you're going deaf, Mom." I couldn't help but chuckle at his teasing. I hadn't heard about him getting married, so I asked my husband, who also shook his head, saying, "No, I didn't hear about it either." We both asked our son what was going on. For some reason, he proudly explained, "That's why I came to announce our marriage registration today." By the way, we had a grand wedding in Bali with friends. My husband and I were left speechless by this unexpected explanation. Our son, oblivious to our reaction, continued to talk about how wonderful a Bali wedding was. I held my aching head and carefully asked, "You've already registered and had the wedding. Why weren't we invited?" Karen, who had been silent until then, spoke up, saying, "Do we need to invite strangers?" I was shocked by her unexpected words. She bluntly continued, "Isn't it a waste of money?" I couldn't help but respond emotionally. "No, we are Richard's parents." Karen seemed unconvinced and looked dissatisfied as she replied, "But you're strangers to me." I was left confused and fell into silence. My son must have finally noticed the tension in the room. The atmosphere grew tense as my son began to hurriedly explain, Karen has no parents or siblings. It would be sad if she was the only one without family, right? That's why I didn't invite you guys." Upon hearing Karen's situation, I found myself at a loss for words. I thought that maybe there was something I could do to help, although I wasn't entirely satisfied. However, I told myself it was too late since the wedding was already over. After the newlyweds left, I confided in my husband, saying, "I wonder if those two will be okay." My husband seemed to share my concern but replied, "It's their decision. They're already married. All we can do is watch them from the inside." Although I agreed with my husband's opinion, I couldn't leave it at that. I decided to try to bridge the gap with Karen. I obtained my son's phone number and decided to get in touch. When Karen realized it was me on the phone, her voice immediately turned sour. She asked, "What do you want?" I thought I had made her uncomfortable by calling out of the blue, so I quickly explained my reason. I got some delicious treats, so I thought I'd bring them over to you next time." Karen responded, "Oh, I don't need that. In fact, I don't even plan to give you my address." I couldn't help but ask why, and Karen calmly answered, "I don't want to give personal information to strangers. Please delete my phone number." Before I could say anything else, the call was disconnected. After that, I couldn't get in touch with Karen. What I did must have felt like an unnecessary intrusion to her. Feeling down, my husband told me, "There's still time. Don't rush it. Forcing closeness won't necessarily lead to good results. Just hope that she'll open her heart to us someday." I cooled my head and nodded, "You're right." A month after I stopped trying to contact my son and his wife, my son suddenly got in touch. "What's going on?" I asked. He told me that Karen was pregnant. I was thrilled by the happy news and thought it would be tough for a first-time mother without her parents. So I asked for their address to go help, but my son said, "No, I can't give you. We don't need any help with the address. Just give us some money. Please provide your bank account number so we can transfer it." I tried to explain to my son the challenges of childbirth, but he wouldn't listen. Furthermore, he mentioned that Karen herself was against any assistance. In the end, I transferred only the money as my son wanted. After that, I never heard from my son again, and there was no report of the child's birth. A year passed and I tried to call my son several times, but eventually I couldn't reach him at all. It seemed like my son no longer considered us family, and even if I wanted to confirm it, there was no way to get in touch. I felt helpless. One day I encountered a familiar face at the local supermarket. Initially, I didn't recognize him, but when he called out to me, I realized he was David Johnson, a friend my son often brought home during high school. I hadn't recognized him at first because my memory of him was as a high school student. "David, it's been a long time. Do you remember me?" I asked. David seemed pleased and a bit shy. Suddenly, I noticed the woman next to David. She had a matching ring with him, and her belly was noticeably large. I couldn't help but cover my mouth and exclaim, "Oh my, David nodded somewhat sheepishly and said, "This is my wife Olivia. Our child is due in 2 months." "Olivia, is it? Congratulations," I said. Olivia looked momentarily confused but soon smiled happily. After brief greetings, we quickly parted ways, not wanting to burden the expectant mother. 2 months after reuniting with David, I received an email from him. In fact, we had exchanged contact information when we met because he wanted to announce the birth. Attached to the email was a picture of the newborn baby, who was undeniably adorable. Suddenly, I found myself imagining my own grandchild, whom I had never seen, and I shed a few tears. I emailed David, expressing my desire to send a gift to celebrate the occasion. A flustered David called me in response, saying, "I didn't contact you with that intention, so please don't trouble yourself." I couldn't help but laugh at David's apologetic tone, and assured him, "That's not it. I just want to celebrate since I can't do anything for my own grandchild." There was a moment of silence, and then David asked, "Did something happen with Richard, didn't it?" As I remained silent, David began to speak, revealing a shocking revelation. Olivia was originally Richard's girlfriend, but Richard chose another woman and unilaterally ended his relationship with Olivia. That other woman was Karen, and Olivia was devastated after being abandoned by Richard. I couldn't abandon Olivia like that. I made several attempts to persuade Richard, but he remained unyielding. Eventually, I gave up on trying to convince him and severed our friendship. David's narrative concluded at that point. At that moment, I felt torn between my own child, Richard, and the realization that my actions had unintentionally reminded Olivia of her painful past, even though I had no knowledge of it. I had done something terrible to Olivia, and it was apparent that she probably didn't want to meet Richard's mother. I felt deeply remorseful for casually expressing my desire to celebrate. When I apologized to David, he was quick to dismiss it, saying, "You don't need to apologize, Mrs. Smith. Olivia doesn't mind. She was the one who wanted to send the baby's picture." "Please don't apologize, Mrs. Smith. Their kindness only made me feel guiltier." David hesitated for a moment and then added, "I just don't want to involve Olivia with Richard and his wife ever again." I wholeheartedly agreed, offering my assistance to the extent that I could, even though I knew there might not be much I could do. During our conversation, I also disclosed my strained relationship with my son and his wife. David was genuinely shocked by Richard's recent behavior. Afterward, we deliberately shifted our discussion to lighter topics before ending the call. Later, I shared what I had learned from David with my husband and informed him of my decision to consider Richard and his family as strangers from that point forward. My husband concurred with my decision, remarking, "At least we can take a breather." I glanced around the mostly unpacked room and nodded, feeling a sense of renewal. Our new life begins here today, I thought. Originally, our previous house had been too large just for the two of us. When we contemplated moving, we were introduced to this newly built high-rise condominium. Although we were supposed to inform our son about it, we decided against doing so. I decided to go out to buy ingredients for dinner, and as I stepped out of the front door, someone called out to me, "Mom." I turned around in disbelief, thinking it couldn't be true, and there stood my son, approaching with a faint smile. "Oh, why didn't you tell me you moved? I was surprised to find strangers at the old house. Richard continued to ramble nervously by my side, but I remained silent and unresponsive to his attempts to engage me. Seeing my unwavering demeanor, Richard began to realize that the situation was not in his favor, and he became increasingly anxious. He tried to justify Karen's actions by saying Karen was a habitual liar. Her claim of having no family was a lie. She had only been disowned by her parents after causing a romantic problem at her previous job. When I glanced at my son, he appeared to have misunderstood something and continued to criticize Karen. She approached me for financial support after quitting her job, unable to live independently. My son insisted that he was the victim in all of this and requested to live in the same high-rise condominium. I paused and directed my gaze at my son's face. He appeared to be relieved, thinking I was finally willing to listen. However, I maintained my stern expression and told Richard, "Your choice to be with that woman, even while you were dating someone else, has consequences." My son was taken aback by my words. I delivered the decisive message to him, stating, "Your only family now is Karen. You two are a perfect match." Leaving my son standing there, I walked away from the scene. Afterwards, I contacted David, concerned that my son might cause trouble for him and Olivia. As expected, my son attempted to apologize to Olivia and asked David to mediate between us. He even made nonsensical statements like, "You two got married because of me." David, at his wits' end, declared that he was cutting ties with my son and threatened to involve the police if he persisted. My son seemingly fled in panic. Subsequently, my enraged son tried to spread negative rumors about David and Olivia among our common friends, but ended up facing their scorn instead. Karen, who was supposed to be my son's only ally, ran away with another man, leaving their child behind as soon as she depleted my son's savings. Despite hearing these rumors, we had no intention of helping our son. After some time, my son came to us with the child, saying, "You must find it pitiful for your grandchild, right? Let us stay here." At this point, my husband, who had been silent until then, shouted, "Don't be ridiculous. Stop acting like a spoiled child at your age. You're no longer our son, but a stranger. Get out." Frightened by our harsh attitude, my son left the grandchild and ran away. My husband quickly locked the front door, and I gently picked up the abandoned grandchild. The child, not understanding the situation, reached out to my husband with a smile. Seeing that innocent smile, my husband and I shared the same sentiment. We had no intention of forgiving our son and Karen in the future, but the child was blameless. We nodded in agreement. We made the decision to raise this child ourselves. I heard rumors that my son was now doing labor-intensive work and struggling to make ends meet. He must be facing the hardships of a job he disliked, one that involved physical labor. Despite this, he hadn't attempted to force his way back into our lives, for now, and even if he did, the outcome would remain the same. My husband and I were occupied daily, focusing on the upbringing of our grandchild. We weren't as young as we used to be, so raising a child posed its challenges, but the smile of this child provided us with the strength to persevere. Some aspects of our retirement may have to wait, but until then, we intended to cherish the time we had with our grandchild, as well as with each other.